Wales, land of the midnight sun, and booked us come here for a special edition from the Literary Festival from Hay-on-Wye. Now, every year, 30,000 book lovers swoop down on this little town. Population, 1,300, number of bookshops, 36, number of great big rivers, 1, the Wye, which flows from here down into the Wherefore and thence to the great rolling sea. They come here to listen to authors talk about their books, read aloud and complain about their publishers. And 300 of them come here because they want to be part of the audience for Booked. Welcome to this special edition of Books from Hay-on-Wye. This is the last in the present run, but the first to be filmed inside a tent with cocoa and marshmallows after the show. And our specialist subjects for discussion today are the Holocaust, the Book of Job, the Code of the Woosters, and the life and works of Dame Muriel Spark. So, mastermind, eat your heart out. My guests this week are Dame Muriel Spark herself, writer and broadcaster Christopher Hitchens, and where would I have been without her? Nigella Lawson, who's been here plugging her own new food book. First up, Guilt and Moral Responsibility in Post-War Germany. When this book, The Reader by Bernhard Schlink, was published in hardback last year, many critics went balmy with enthusiasm. It's out in paperback on Monday and will probably be one of the most talked about books of the summer. It starts in the Germany of the 1950s with a passionate affair between a 15-year-old schoolboy called Michael and an older woman called Hannah. Then Hannah vanishes. Years later, when Michael's a law student, he sees her again, on trial for war crimes. It turns out that she'd been a member of the SS and a guard at Auschwitz. Michael, like the rest of his generation, is forced to confront the terrible things that ordinary people did in the not at all distant Nazi past. Nigella, that's a synopsis of the plot, but what do you think the book's actually about?
Well, to a great extent, it is that very Germanic thing, the Bildungsroman and a boy's sort of the rites of passage as he comes of age with this very important sexual initiation in the beginning. But of course, from there, I mean, that's quite a significant part of the book. But from there, of course, it opens up into the idea that the legacy also of the young boy is post-war Germany. And he is having, along with his contemporaries, to grapple with his parents' generation, and that the whole burden of how much he is also part of the blame and the shame, and how much he has to free himself from that.
Dame Muriel, do you think this is a good book?
Yes, I think it's gripping. I think there are faults in that of plausibility. One doesn't altogether believe that this schoolboy could have a prolonged affair with a mature woman of her class without being discovered in some way. However, this is a Germanic situation. And maybe they can.
Christopher, what do you think?
I think it's a negligible book. I think it's a bogus book, and the carpentry shows in part in the fact that you can't believe a word the guy's saying. They don't exchange names till they seem to have known each other forever. He doesn't really get to know anything about her. The fact that it turns out that she may or may not have played some minor role in the final solution is, I think, simply, and I must say, I think objectionably, added to the narrative in order to give it the air of spurious moral seriousness that I'm depressed to see so many reviewers falling for. Because I think when they're confronted with a book that has this extraordinary atrocity as its central theme, they don't dare say, actually, this person doesn't really feel strongly about it at all. He isn't making any effort to confront history or conscience, or hasn't indeed been prepared to go to the trouble of creating believable character.
Nigella, let's talk about the Holocaust theme in this, because one of the criticisms that's been made of the book, I want to come back to some of the others later, is that in some ways it's an apologia, it's an apology.
I find it doesn't surprise me that it's a hugely defensive book, and I may say on that score it does not surprise me that where it's been incredibly successful is in France. This seems to me of a piece that it is defensive to an offensive degree, that it is, look, she was illiterate, she didn't know what she was doing, she was only obeying orders, and actually, the church was hit by an Allied bomb, so who can say who's guilty and who's innocent? We're all guilty. Right, I wash my hands of it. It can now be made into a film. We can watch it and not feel too bad.
Right. I mean, I'm going to have my three penneth here, because I think that there are some faults in this book, but I think that this book absolutely courageously confronts, in a way that almost no other book does, or that I've read does, this question of responsibility. He says, this is the boy, I mean, whether or not it's plausible he would have had an affair with her and so on, as Dame Muriel says, this could be Germany or it could just be novelists, whatever, lots of implausibilities are found in novels. But he says, I wanted simultaneously to understand Hannah's crime and to condemn it, but it was too terrible for that. When I tried to understand it, I had the feeling I was failing to condemn it as it must be condemned. When I condemned it as it must be condemned, there was no room for understanding. But even as I wanted to understand Hannah, failing to understand her meant betraying her all over again. Now, this must be how it really is, although it's incredibly difficult to say.
That makes it sound, that quote makes it sound the book is grappling with something. The book is attempting to distance something, which is very different.
Well, I don't...
For example, she can't read, so she manages to transfer from a factory job. I think working for Siemens. I think he even mentions one of the German capitalist corporations that actually sponsored the rise of Nazism. They wouldn't know that. But she's able to make a smooth transition without being able to read or write from there to the SS. And then to have people in her care accidentally killed by the RAF. Now, in Hannah Arendt's book on the trial of Eichmann in Jerusalem, she coined a phrase that I think everyone's now heard, namely the banality of evil, the stunted human scale of the perpetrator and so on. This is well below that, and I think actually illustrates the evil of banality. But
Christopher, I mean, the fact is, I mean, Nigella's made a lot of the fact it's an Allied bomb, but the fact is the responsibility is not dodged here. It's quite clear that they could have let these women out if they'd wanted to do so. And she's talking in the courtroom. The Hannah character is talking to the judge, to whom she twice poses the all-important question, above which there is no more important question. Well, what would you have done? Which is something we don't like to ask about that particular period, because we assume that we are something other, and then we're confronted with a Bosnian and we wonder how other we actually are. But she says, you know, we couldn't just let them escape. We were responsible for them. We'd guarded them the whole time in the camp and on the march. That was the point, that we had to guard them and not let them escape. That's why we didn't know what to do. We also had no idea how many of the women would survive the next few days. So many had died already, and the ones who were still alive were so weak. Now, that's a pathetic apology, and she's not allowed off the hook, is she?
Well, I don't know that she's not allowed off the hook. I think there is a sense in which it's being almost boorish. It's almost bad form to go on about really what would happen. Have you noticed the word Jew is hardly mentioned in this book? That would be kind of... that would be sort of tremendously unsubtle. I don't think that she is exonerated, but on the other hand, I think we are asked to rephrase the question, and I think, why are we being asked to rephrase the question? I'm sorry if it makes Bernhard Schlink and his generation feel bad, but that isn't really my major concern.
Yeah, David, I think I have to second Nigella again, because if this had been the first book to come out of Berlin writing on this topic, one would say, well, it's got all these faults Nigella's mentioned, but after all, you know, it's an attempt to grapple. Hasn't the idea of collective guilt versus collective responsibility in Germany been reasonably well thrashed out, addressed by some quite sophisticated and brave people, some people with real moral and mental toughness by now? It's not as if there isn't a single person in this room who doesn't already know what we're talking about. And yet it does read as if it's a first draft of an attempt to claim, in other words, therefore, the courage that doesn't really belong to it.
Dame Muriel, can you mediate for us?
Well, no, I think, I do agree that I don't like books that milk the Holocaust as they do. I think there's been enough of that, just to get a public, that you only have to mention that word or that subject, and there's an enormous public for it. In this book, I do think that you are invited to say, what would you have done? Well, I think that anyone would have unlocked the door of the church, any sane, normal person. And these people were obviously insane or very evil. And I certainly wouldn't have had anything more to do with such a woman myself, you know, if I'd been this young man. And I don't think I don't think they can wriggle out of that.
No, and I suppose my argument would be that they don't try. We're going to have to move on, unfortunately, from this book now. The Reader's published in paperback on Monday, price £5.99 from Phoenix. Now, let's lighten up a bit with Dame Muriel's book choice, which is this, or part of this, the Book of Job. Job is the 18th book of the Bible, stuck between Esther and Psalms. There was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, is how it begins. Where is the land of Uz, you may ask? Where is Uz? To which the answer is, we is in Hay-on-Wye. Old Job is one of God's best beloved, upright, pious and big on sacrifices and offerings. So God rewards him by inflicting upon him a series of appalling curses, just to test his fidelity. At one point he's reduced to sitting on an ash heap trying to scrape the boils off his face with a bit of old crockery. Job's faith remains intact despite a spectacularly unhelpful dialogue with his so-called comforters, a dialogue that fails to answer the question, why does God make the righteous suffer? Dame Muriel Spark, you've chosen this. When did you first read it?
First.
When did you first read it?
Oh, right back in when I was a child, because I went to a school where we were always reading the Bible. But I was fascinated. I started writing about it in the 50s, so that's a long time ago. And I've always been fascinated by it. And I've gone through several interpretations. But I must say that the Book of Job is the one book in the Bible that is not remotely historical. We are not obliged to believe there was a Job. It's like the Good Samaritan, it's a parable. There was a legendary Job, a Babylonian Job. The land of Uz was obviously Babylonian. And the author, who was a brilliant poet of the Book of Job, took the beginning and the end as a prologue and an epilogue in a very formal way. And in the middle, he stuck a quite revolutionary type of book in the most beautiful poetry imaginable.
And is it the poetry that really appeals to you? I mean, is there a bit that you...
Yes, I can, where God comes out of a whirlwind and says, you know, who are you? I'm me. Who are you? And then he says, I made this and I made that. The most wonderful poetry. And it sort of takes Job out of himself. I think it's sort of almost therapeutic. This wonderful, look at my creation, my universe, my horses, my this, that.
Yes,
Yes.
And it has a lot about fearsome nostrils in it as well, doesn't it?
Yes, indeed. There's a bit... would you like me to read
Yes, please
you?
do.
This is God's war horse. Hast thou given the horse strength? Hast thou clothed his neck with thunder? Canst thou make him afraid as a grasshopper? The glory of his nostrils is terrible. He poureth in the valley, and rejoiceth in his strength. He goeth on to meet the armed men. He mocketh at fear, and is not affrighted. Neither turneth he back from the sword. The quiver rattleth against him, the glittering spear and the shield. He swalloweth the ground with fierceness and rage. Neither believeth he that it is the sound of the trumpet. He saith among the trumpets, Ha! And he smelleth the battle afar off, the thunder of the captains and the shouting.
Before we just move to Christopher and Nigella, I mean, the theology in this seems a bit odd. I mean, after all, this all comes about because God's been having a bit of an argument with Satan, hasn't it? And Satan says, and the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth and from walking up and down in it. And says, actually, it's not as good as you think it is, God. And God says, no, look at Job. And Satan says, yeah, well, old Job, you know, he'd give in if you just sent a few nasty things to him. And so this capricious, dreadful God says, all right, then, we'll load the whole lot onto Job.
That's right. It's a marvellous novel, actually. It's a
for some people, Christopher.
Beautiful story. And then, in the end, Job gets back all his property and children and everything, but that's only a formality from the myth. His daughters are called cinnamon, eye paint, various things. And
Christopher, what do you think?
There is that under-remarked aspect that I think may be one of the origins of Manichaeism, that there are God and a devil, as you say, are having a conversation. And without loss of time, God delivers one of his most favoured subjects as, so to speak, an experiment. It shows, in a sense, how totalitarian religion can be. You mentioned you hinted at this. I mean, I remember there used to be a joke in Albania about the chap who says when he comes out of prison for 5 years, what we win for? Nothing. Don't be silly, you only get 2 years for that. That if this be a God, if this be a God, then the question is not why doesn't he stop suffering, but why does anyone want to worship him except possibly out of holy terror? Now, there's a thing we all have in common here, I think, which is a certain amount of Jewish blood each. You needn't argue about the proportions. And it doesn't give us, I think, and I don't believe it's there's any genetic claim on the Old Testament either, but my rabbi, the man who married me, Rabbi Goldberg, who was the emeritus rabbi of the American Reform congregation.
You couldn't get married by any old man.
No. I needed an Einsteinian agnostic before I could. When he was at the Hebrew Union Theological Seminary, he did his thesis, special doctoral thesis, on the book of Job because, as he said, it's the stupidest book in the Bible. It may be, in some ways, the most beautiful. I mean, man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. That could be Aeschylus. But what's so obvious is that it's a man-made God. God thinks he proves his power and glory by persecuting some old kvetch who's surrounded by other old kvetches. No. To invert what is said in St. John, I think it's St. John, God does not make man in his own image, man makes God in his own image, and that's why God is so often a barbarian.
Nigella, do you agree with that?
Well, I think certainly that it is an extraordinary manifesto for the atheist. But I also think it's very interesting that Dame Muriel responds to it as a Catholic, because what it's saying is there should be a relationship between man and God, no one in between. I will speak to God and God will speak to me, and that's not normally the Catholic view of these things.
Dame Muriel, last word.
Well, I think it was prefiguring the New Testament, where I think Jesus Christ was the ultimate Job. I really challenged the whole works, the whole establishment. And this was leading on to that.
Okay.
Why he's so popular with the establishment?
The Book of Job is available from all good bookshops or from those nice West Indian women in hats who knock on your door on Saturday mornings when you're in your wife fronts. Or you could pinch one from a hotel bedroom. On to Christopher's choice, The Code of the Woosters by P.G. Wodehouse. It's a rattling Jeeves and Wooster yarn with an impossible-to-summarise plot involving a mad aunt, daft girls, a silver cow creamer, a stolen policeman's helmet, a vicious Scotty dog and a villain called Spode, who bears more than a passing resemblance to fascist leader Oswald Mosley. Christopher, you're known as a terrific left-winger, but you've chosen a book all about toss running around a country house.
Yes, there is that. Well, first I knew that we were going to go from the Holocaust to Job. I knew that already, so I thought I'd better have a pretty strong return serve when it came to my choice. And so I tossed aside How Green Was My Valley and plucked up. I don't know if I've ever bored you with my theory, but who here has not seen The Importance of Being Earnest? I should think there isn't a single soul. What's the first line of The Importance of Being Earnest? I'll tell you. Young man, obviously in either Mayfair or Berkeley Square or Piccadilly, playing the piano on his own. Butler comes in. Chap doesn't notice him. Continues to play. Butler remains impassive. Butler is noticed. Did you happen to hear what I was playing, Lane? Says the young man. I didn't think it polite to listen, sir. The next person who comes in is the most terrifying aunt, second most terrifying aunt, perhaps in English literature, Lady Bracknell, Aunt Augusta. Stupid romances, sundered hearts, extraordinary engagements that are all about money, the removal to the country house, the rural deans, the absurd figures. I think it's very obvious that the whole, as it were, moral and mental atmosphere of Wodehouse is derived from Oscar Wilde. And I think that The Code of the Woosters is the most perfect realization of it. It is his Importance of Being Earnest. It's the summa of his work.
And so why do you like it
and
so much?
If you want an ideological justification for it, published as it was in 1938, the figure of Sir Roderick Spode, you could go through the whole of Anthony Powell, supposed to be the great Tory social realist of England and the novel in that period. There isn't a single fascist in Anthony Powell's depiction. So Roderick Spode, leader of the Black Shorts movement. And Bertie says to his friend, Gussie, he sounds Gussie, by the way, Gussie, when you say shorts, you do mean shirts, don't you? And Gussie says, no, the shirts had run out by the time Roderick started his movement. So Bertie says, what, you mean they walk around in footer bags? Gussie says, yes. Bertie says, how perfectly foul. It's the most, and the scene where Spode is unmasked, I can't spoil it for you, is, I think, one of the great anti-fascist scenes ever written, ever penned.
It certainly tells you an awful lot about why fascism never really took off in England,
and then the metaphors, you see. I mean, there was always one on every page. He writhed like an electric fan. Of all the soups I've ever been in, this one wins the mottled oyster. I think ice formed on the upper slopes of the Butler is in there too. There is really there's hardly a word or phrase out of place. It's a masterpiece.
No, it is a masterpiece, and also there is one other thing that he does, which is quite extraordinary if you think about it. This is all narrated by somebody who's supposed to be thick, and yet it has to be immensely perceptive. I just want to read this little bit. He's talking about Madeline Bassett, who Wooster doesn't get on well with women one way or another. He says, I call her a ghastly girl because she was a ghastly girl. The Woosters are chivalrous, but they can speak their minds. A droopy, soupy, sentimental exhibit with melting eyes and a cooing voice, and the most extraordinary views on such things as stars and rabbits. I remember her telling me once that rabbits were gnomes in attendance on the Fairy Queen, and that the stars were God's daisy chain. Perfect rot, of course. They're nothing of the sort.
Yeah, nothing of the sort. Yeah, I was going to say, there is a theological dimension to it, too. He lays about him. He withered like a salted snail. He jumped like a pea on a hot shovel. This is extraordinary.
Nigella, it is funny, but is it a bit of a sort of boy thing, this?
Well, if that's the case, then I'm a boy, because I love this. I love it.
Not.
And it's interesting that you mentioned Anthony Powell, because I find it impossible to read him as a female reader. It's absolutely impossible.
Really?
Yes, whereas Wodehouse I love, and I find, I mean, it's not really, anyway, what's going on is neither here nor there in a way. It's just so, it's as a stylist, I mean, he's so wonderful, so I don't really mind that I can't be Gussie Fink-Nottle. Who would want to be Gussie Fink-Nottle? That's not the point.
Dame Muriel, the Wodehouse world sort of only exists on these pages, a world perfectly constructed by Wodehouse himself. Do you find it an attractive world at all?
No, I don't find the Wodehouse... I can't read this. It's... I really can't take it. I can understand that an author wishes to exclude every real world in order to create his own, but you must want to live in it, and I don't want to live in this world at all. I don't like the diction, I don't like the talk, I don't like this stage door Johnny Deb chat. I cannot take it. And
you don't like the tootling?
No, tootling and bally this, and I really can't take it.
You don't, how do you come out on the phony, confected world of The Importance of Being Earnest?
I think it's much more elegant, the importance of being earnest. It's fun, and it's the words are better chosen, and the plot is better woven. It's altogether a superior production, and there should only be one of them.
Yes.
Not books and books and books.
I certainly think I would give Wilde the palm, in spite of the electric fans and the pea on the shovel and all the rest of it. Well, I would give Wilde the palm, and that's also part of my defence. I mean, Wilde must be counted as one of the great radical and subversive figures of our literature, if we can claim the Irish as being ours for the moment, or let's say our comrades, which I think it would be an honour to be able to do. Where was I? Yes, the world of The Importance of Being Earnest is a touch artificial, nonetheless. Though it's obviously there are thrusts of the Salisbury family in it, and
but on Wodehouse, Christopher.
And when
convince Dame Muriel in a sentence.
But I don't think that matters. I can't see why it matters that a fictional world is a fictional world, because in a sense it's not, you say you wouldn't want to live in it. I'm not sure, even though everyone always says the idyllic world that Wodehouse creates, I'm not sure that one's meant to think of it as an idyll. It's no one reasonably wants to inhabit it except for as a reader, and that's the perfect way of living in it.
Christopher.
Well, exactly, but I mean Wodehouse there are serpents in his Eden always. I mean, there's the vile Sir Watkin Bassett, the repressive magistrate. There's Constable Oates, the endlessly oafish and literal-minded cop. There's Madeline Bassett, who, as you say, thinks the stars are God's daisy chain. And he thinks would be capable, if a wife, of coming up behind him at breakfast with a hangover, he with the hangover, putting her hands over his eyes from behind and saying, "Guess who?"
So Dame Muriel should be reassured that there are nasty things in
yes, there's some gritty realism in there.
There's nobody nobody at all in it that you couldn't take out your insect spray and get rid of.
The code of the Woosters
We start with Schlink and we end by gassing Jeeves. This is an outrage.
The code of the Woosters is published by Vintage, price £5.99. Sadly, it's time to say goodbye and thank you to Christopher Hitchens and to Nigella Lawson. After the adverts, Dame Muriel Spark and me. See you in a moment. Welcome back to Book. Dame Muriel Spark is one of Britain's greatest living writers, but she's been up there for so long now, it's easy to forget just how extraordinary her world is. It's full of ruthlessly manipulative young women in seedy bedsits, twisted gay fake vicars, really vicious old people, fascist blackmailers, and ruffians who fight in tunnels with the bones of dead nuns. Murder, rape, betrayal and savagery of almost every description lurk around every corner. There ain't nothing like Dame Muriel. Dame Muriel, I mean, people think of dames as being demure. There's nothing in any way demure about your books. You're pretty savage, aren't you?
Well, I don't know. It just, I start writing and I think I better liven things up. And if I'm boring myself, I stop, so I have to amuse myself while I'm writing, you know. It's not on if I get bored. I feel the reader's going to be bored.
Let's get this absolutely straight. If you find yourself getting slightly bored with your book, you introduce a piece of savagery.
No, the characters themselves take care of that. I really do. I don't think they're all so savage. I think Miss Brodie is a very correct person. I think she ought to be Dame...
Dame Jean Brodie. She should, but to say that she's a flawed character is not to assume great moral superiority over her, but not only is she absolutely betrayed in the book,
yes,
but she, in a funny way, betrays because she is so egotistical and and lacking in an ability to see the people around her as people.
She's very possessive of her group, and over-possessive. I think that's the main criticism one could level.
Well, she's also a fascist.
Well, I don't know. I don't say she is. She's accused of that. She admired Mussolini. Well, a lot of people did, you know, including the Italians.
But she,
I don't think she was living today. You'd call her a fascist at all. She certainly had no... she had no class consciousness of any great order. It was more... Her distinctions were based more on common sense.
But she's an egotist, isn't she?
Oh, absolutely.
And quite a lot of the characters in your books are distinguished by not just their egotists, they're monstrous egotists. They
tend to go on doing in old age what they, rather more emphatically, what they started off doing as young people.
Now, is that because that's what you think people are like?
It's what I thought people were like, yes, when I wrote the book, but I do think that's what I think people are like, actually.
Are you like that?
Well, you know, that's for my friends to tell me, really. I wouldn't know. I hope not.
So people are like that, but you're not. Okay.
Well, I suppose.
All authors are gods over their work. I mean, we talked about Job earlier, and Faye Weldon has said about the Book of Job that it's the ultimate sort of authorial book. It's the book of authorship. Job seeking to make order of the world around him, and God being the even bigger author.
Yes.
And you're quite a capricious God over your characters, aren't you?
Well, I do what I like with them, yes. I think there's no point in being an author if you can't make them do what you want them to do. The only thing is I like it to be plausible. I like to fool the reader into thinking it's real and make them feel it's a true story.
But you're very unsparing with them.
Unsparing of what?
Unsparing of their humanity. The terrible things happen to them. They do terrible things. In a sense, you're always at pains to bring out what's bad about them. It is human, but it is awful.
Well, I don't know. I find some of them very lovable, even if they're very flawed. I rather like some of my characters. I don't like evil people, though. The truly evil are not really people who are making a noise about being alive.
But in Memento Mori, you were 41 when you wrote that. You created this terrible world of old people, didn't you?
Yes. I could create, having reached the age of 80, I could create an even more terrible world.
Really?
I can tell you, yes.
Now, do you consider yourself, you converted to Catholicism, do you consider yourself in any way a Catholic writer? Like, say, War and Green Work?
Not like them, no. I don't feel the need to proselytize. I don't feel the need to put across a Catholic point of view. But if I wasn't a Catholic, I couldn't not believe. If I wasn't a Catholic, I wouldn't be able to write as I do.
Why?
With the freedom. I don't know why. It just gives me a certain freedom.
Does it give you an insight into, I don't know, a way of thinking? Is it about mystery? Is it about...
It's about mystery, yes. It's about mystery, it's about confidence, a spiritual confidence.
A spiritual confidence?
Yes. I tell you, you have to believe in the Holy Spirit of things moving around the world. If you don't believe in that, then you don't believe in anything.
You don't believe in anything?
No. Life is a mystery.
You were born, however, a Camberg. I was born an Aaronovitch. Now, being born, though we weren't religious, and like the same with your family, my father's Jewish, my mother's not, but being born with a name like that gave you a sense of an identity, or almost of a tradition that you inherit.
Yes.
Why then was it that Catholicism appealed to you when you could have had the Jewish God in a way, couldn't you?
The Jewish God is too limited, tell you the truth. Stops there. And although I find the Jewish people much warmer than the Christians to deal with, much warmer, I don't find the Jewish God warmer.
But the Jewish God is a shouty God, whereas the Catholic God's a sort of sulky God, isn't he?
Well, I don't know. I think that the Catholic, it's a trinity in the first place. I do believe in the Holy Ghost, the Jesus Christ, and in God the Father. As a kind of trinity, I can't not believe. It seems in every way sound to me. The Jewish God just ends there as a great father figure. The reason why I became a Catholic is because I wanted to be a Christian very much.
Why?
I was convinced by reading Cardinal Newman and by wanting to go on from where I live. But I wasn't brought up as a Jew. No. I was brought up in a Presbyterian school, and I was brought up as a Christian in the sense that it was my mother's tradition.
But nevertheless, with this name Camberg and this sense, you've written yourself about the inherence of Judaism.
Yes.
And you read earlier in the Hay Festival one of your short stories, which calls The Gentile Jewess. That's right. In which you talk about a grandmother who She will admit to the family that she's Jewish, but outside she doesn't want to be.
No.
That's right. At one point she says she kept the shop of all sorts in Watford. She'd not like the Jewish part of her origin to be known because it was bad for business.
Bad for business, yes. She was a very, very special character. In fact, she wasn't a Jewess. Her father was a Jew, but she was married in a parish church and to a Gentile, so that she was what she called herself a Gentile Jewess.
But there's no suggestion that back in the 50s that being a Jewish writer was bad for business.
Oh no! I didn't become a Catholic because it was bad.
Good for business.
I wasn't thinking of business anything. It might have been more business-like to stay. My father was quite keen on me being a Catholic. He didn't mind at all. And I was very fond of my father, the Jewish side. I was fond of my mother too, but I preferred my father every time. And I think that I had so many different religions pressing in on me that I found that the Catholic was the final answer.
Do you think that you are, in a sense, a Jewish writer as well?
That's a difficult question to answer, but I think that there must be something there because I have Jewish blood, and obviously it is part of my formation, genetically. But I'm not conscious of being a Jewish writer intellectually.
Dame Muriel, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
This is the last in the present series. We'll be back in the autumn. Thanks for watching. Thank you.